Hello everybody, welcome back to Reaper Minis TV. We've got several monsters to get started with today, so we'll jump right in. First up is, I'll try to pronounce this right, Skalathrix, the Vulture Demon, or a Vulture Demon. And immediately it does make me think of an old Tzeentch Lord of Change, but we'll get into some possible uses for this figure in a second. There's a total of 5 pieces that are going to go into the assembly of the figure. You have the main body itself, which is the legs, the torso, and one of the arms. And then you have the wings. They're feathered wings that are a single piece that are going to fit into a slot on the back of the figure. And then on a metal sprue, you have the head, the other arm, and a tail. After cleaning up all the pieces, and you can see there are some extra bits of metal from the casting process and some mold lines to take care of. But once you take care of that, all of the pieces fit into place really well. I really don't think you're going to need to pin anything. If you want to be my guest, I'm not going to. I think just super gluing it and it's going to stay in place just fine. If you're careful, you can move the arms a little bit to adjust the pose. It comes with a nicely detailed integrated base that has some skulls on it and some rubble. Now, as far as uses, in a fantasy game like D&D, using it as a Vulture Demon is pretty obvious. In Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, just using it as a Tzeentch Demon is a perfect place for it. You can maybe use it along with the Hordelings from the last episode as a whole group of Tzeentch Demons. As a Lord of Change, it's probably too small for the upscaling that the Greater Demons have seen recently from GW, or maybe not recently, just in general, but you could use it as a Demon Prince in a Chaos Army, a Demon's Army, something like that. I think it would fit in just fine size-wise and be just something a little different. Here we have a Sabretooth Tiger, and it's a multiple-piece model also. You get the bulk of the figure as a single piece, and then on a metal sprue, you have the right paw and part of its right front leg, and the Sabretooth, well, the saber teeth, I guess you should call them, on the sprue there. So you'll clip these off. The front paw goes into place and the leg easily enough. The teeth, just be careful when you're clipping it off the sprue so you don't damage the piece. It is a little bit small, and you do want to make sure that you're able to get it in place on the upper jaw without a problem. It does come with an integrated base, but it is narrow enough to where you can just immediately and easily enough drop it down onto a cavalry base and not have to clip it or anything like that. So if you wanted to drop it into an Isingstead army as a replacement for a Winter Wolf, I think it would work very well for that. But also in pretty much any fantasy RPG, using it in a winter or cold weather or up in the mountains kind of combat scenario, I think that's its best intended use, and it'll be perfect for that. Also from the Dark Heaven Legends line, this is Dulkathar. He's a Necromancer. And immediately, since I've got a large Vampire Counts army for Warhammer Fantasy Battle, I wanted to see if I could use him as a Necromancer in that army. He'll fit onto a 20mm square base with no problem whatsoever, no cutting of the base needed or anything like that. It's a single-piece miniature of what appears to be a human Necromancer, obviously. He's got a long, stringy beard. He's got a somewhat tattered cloak that has a few bits of gear on it. On the backside, he's got a scroll and a potion. There is a small shovel or spade on his right side that he's going to use to dig up whatever things he needs to in the graveyard to work his evil magic with. He's sort of cradling a skull, but it looks like a horned skull, so it is probably some kind of demon or something like that. And then some extra details that he's carrying. He's got a pouch, he's got a couple of small skulls on the front side, a little bell, and some feathers. So quite a bit of extra little detail that'll need to be picked out while painting the figure. So as a Necromancer or some other kind of evil spellcaster, he'll fit that bill perfectly. Okay, onto the Pathfinder line for a second, and we've got 3 figures here, starting off with Velmarius Elazarin. And he is a spellcaster-looking guy. He's got both arms up in the air like he's doing some kind of mystic incantation or something. He's got robes on and not any armor or anything like that, and really no visible weapons or any adventuring gear on the figure. Cleanup was mostly limited to the underside of both arms where his robes are. There were some mold lines and a little bit of extra metal there from the casting process, but after 30 seconds to a minute, he's pretty much cleaned and ready to be glued onto the base and primed. Details on the figure are really, really good. From his hands to his face to the flow of his robes, everything is really well done. This next figure is Eccardian Drovenge, and I was immediately blown away by the level of tiny detail on the armor of the figure, and it is just exquisite. It might take an extra steady hand to get it all painted to look really, really good, but It is just an amazing amount of detail on this figure. It's a single-piece figure carrying a sword in his right hand, and really at sort of an at-the-ready or relaxed pose. He has horns coming off of his head, so some kind of non-standard humanoid figure here. Cleanup was limited to a couple bits here and there, except on the horns. There was a little part of extra metal on the horns that are going to take just a steady hand, and be careful when you're cleaning that if you get it on yours also, because you don't want to mar or damage those. If you wanted to, you could fairly easily clip off the horns and then use a little bit of green putty to sculpt in some of his forehead and a little bit more hair there. I'm not going to go to that length because I'm going to drop him immediately into a all-metal, almost all Reaper Warriors of Chaos army that I'm building for Warhammer Fantasy Battle. He's going to fit in perfectly as a Chaos Warrior that's got some mutations. And then last in the Pathfinder line for this episode, we have a guy called Grey Gardener. Now, my Pathfinder foo is weak, so I don't know if he is the Grey Gardener or a Grey Gardener, but that's what he's called. It's a single-piece figure, and if he looks a lot like somebody you might have seen in the movie Brotherhood of the Wolf, that's what I thought also. He's very reminiscent of that. In terms of armor, he's wearing all leather and cloth, nothing heavier than that you can see. Weapon-wise, he's got a staff in his right hand. So he's looking like some kind of rogue or maybe a monk-type character. I'm not thrilled with the staff. I could probably clip it off, do some filing of the part that's under his arm itself, and swap it out, but I don't know if it's really worth going to that length of a conversion just to swap out the weapon. I really do like everything about the figure except for the weapon that he's holding, so if you need a monk or thief type character that's carrying a staff or a heavy weighted stick to beat somebody with, then you've got what you need here. For me, I probably don't have a huge use for it, only because the conversion to get the stick out of his hand and put another weapon in there is probably very difficult. And now we'll wrap up this episode with a Warlord figure. This is for the Kargir faction. It's an Orc Warbringer. And you might remember I use a lot of these Kargir and Black Orcs in my Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay campaign. This is no exception. He's going to get dropped right into that warband of orcs that I've got that I menace the players with. He's a single-piece figure, and you can see there were some significant mold lines on the underside of both of his arms. Those needed to be worked on for a little while to get them to match up to the rest of his arms. So just either check out the blister before you pick one up, or if you pick one up that has those heavier mold lines like this one does, expect to do a little bit of work on it. He's carrying two very heavy serrated chopping blades, or blades that look like they'd be good for chopping, a mishmash of armor that ranges from torn clothing to what looks like some leather and some chain and some plate, so very well armored even though it is a mishmash of armor, pretty suitable for an orc. Since it is a Warlord figure, he's designed to fit on a 25mm square base, and with all of the Warlord orcs and some of the Black Orcs that are in the Dark Heaven Legends line, you can get them all to fit onto 25mm square bases. So if you're not playing a fantasy role-playing game, you could very easily use all of those kinds of orcs in a large unit of Black Orcs for Warhammer Fantasy Battle. I think they'd look awesome as a big unit of metal orcs. Alright everybody, thanks for watching Reaper Minis TV. We'll see you next episode.